Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we are going on a really fascinating, highly systematic journey. We're shifting gears from looking at individual speech sounds to the overarching musicality of speech, suprasegmental phonology, or what we more commonly call intonation. Today we're tracing a path straight from the purely physical, measurable properties of pitch all the way to the hidden, precise, and often entirely unspoken meanings behind the simplest English words. By the time we're done, you will literally never hear the words yes or no the same way again.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. We are taking a complex, academic subject and breaking it into highly digestible chunks. We'll start with intonation basics, look at form and function, contrast English with tone languages, explore complex tones, map out the functions of English tones, and finally look at tones on other words.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Intonation Basics.
So we need to introduce the raw material of speech, which is pitch. Think about your everyday conversations. We almost never speak on a fixed, unvarying pitch. When we speak normally, our pitch is constantly, dynamically bouncing around. But to be incredibly precise here, we've got to separate what we feel from what we can actually measure. Pitch is really a subjective auditory sensation. It's just what the hearer experiences. You hear a voice is high or low. But physically, what's actually happening in the speaker's throat is the rate of vibration of the vocal folds, and that is a physical, objectively measurable reality called fundamental frequency. Now, for our purposes, we're just going to use the word pitch informally to cover both, but as focused learners, it's absolutely vital you know the technical difference between the acoustic measurement and the human sensation.
Now, obviously, not all pitch matters to us linguistically. Picture this. I'm trying to talk to you while I'm bouncing up and down on a galloping horse. My voice is going to be going up and down and all over the place. But that erratic, uncontrolled pitch isn't carrying any hidden grammatical meaning, right? It's just physics and gravity. That is non-linguistic pitch. Similarly, your habitual pitch, basically just how high or low your voice naturally sits because of your physical vocal tract, that doesn't carry meaning either. For pitch to be linguistic, it must be under the speaker's deliberate control, and it has to be clearly perceptible to the listener.
Moving right along to Section 2, Form and Function. Okay, we know what pitch is, but how do we actually observe it and figure out what it's doing? Well, we need to look at the shortest pieces of speech possible, using two very specific definitions. First is an utterance. This is simply a continuous piece of speech beginning and ending with a clear pause. We'll be looking at one-syllable utterances today. Second is tone. Tone is the overall behavior of the pitch in an utterance. It can be level or it can be moving. What's super fascinating is that if you try to say a one-syllable word in English with a completely flat, level tone, like a robot, it sounds incredibly unnatural. English speakers just rely heavily on moving tones in natural speech.
Which brings us to Section 3, Tone Languages.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive difference in how humans communicate. We have to raise the stakes here, because while English uses tone for nuance, millions of people around the world use pitch in a completely absolute way. In a tone language, changing the pitch completely changes the dictionary definition of the word. For example, in Kono, a language of West Africa, a high-level pitch on a specific word means uncle, but a low-level pitch means greedy. In Mandarin Chinese, the syllable ma with a level tone means mother. With a rising tone, it means hemp. With a falling tone, it means scold. The pitch literally dictates the actual vocabulary. English is completely different. If I say yes with a high pitch or yes with a low pitch, the dictionary definition is still just affirmative agreement.
Section 4, Complex Tones and Pitch Height.
So the crucial point here is that while we've seen the basic rises and falls, we must prepare for slightly more complicated pitch movements before we can start decoding their specific meanings. We have our simple tones, the level, the fall, and the rise. But human emotion is complex, and so is our voice. We use complex tones like the fall-rise, where the voice dips down and scoops back up, or the rise-fall, where it swoops up and crashes down. On top of that, we occasionally inject extra pitch height. You don't just say a normal falling yes, you might yell an incredibly high, emphatic yes to express really intense, strong feelings.
All right, Section 5, Functions of English Tones. We are now at the absolute climax of our explainer. We are going to decode the exact, precise meanings behind the intonation patterns of everyday English words. Let's start with the falling tone, a strict downward pitch. If I look at you and say, yes, or no. Notice that drop? This conveys a powerful impression of finality. It signals to the listener that the question is fully answered, the transaction is totally complete, and frankly, there is nothing more to be said.
It effectively shuts down any further expansion of that conversation.
But what if we flip it? What if I change my vocal delivery entirely to an upward, questioning pitch? If I say yes or no, do you hear how that upward lilt just leaves the door wide open? It conveys the impression that something more is to follow. It acts as an active invitation for the other person to continue talking. Let's look at this in action.
Imagine this brief dialogue. Person A asks, "Do you know John Smith?" If person B responds with a falling, "Yes," the conversation just dies right there. But if person B responds with a rising, "Yes," they are saying, "I do know him. Please continue and tell me what you wanted to say about him." That upward pitch literally demands follow-up information.
The exact same mechanic works with no. Person A says, "Have you seen Anne?" Person B replies, "No." By using that rising tone, B isn't just delivering a negative fact. B is inviting A to explain why she's looking for Anne in the first place, or perhaps offering to help look. It is a complete invitation to elaborate.
Okay, now things get wonderfully subtle. The fall-rise tone. The voice dips down and then comes back up. This pitch perfectly conveys limited agreement or a response with reservations. It introduces a subtle hesitation, a completely unspoken but into the conversation without adding any extra words at all. Let's execute this mini narrative so you can clearly hear it. Person A says, "I've heard that it's a good school." Person B replies, "Yes." Did you catch that dip and rise? By doing that, B concedes the point. Sure, it has a good reputation, but the tone implies a lingering reluctance or that B knows some secret flaw they're about to share. The tone is doing all the heavy lifting of the disagreement.
Next up is the rise-fall. This one requires a dramatic upward then downward vocal swoop. While this tone is slightly less frequent in everyday neutral chat, it is absolutely vital for intense, immediate reactions. It signals strong feelings of approval, disapproval, or surprise. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the context completely flavors the swoop. Person A looks out over a mountain and says, "Isn't the view lovely?" Person B responds with an immensely impressed, surprised rise-fall, "Yes!" The pitch soars up with the light and anchors down with absolute certainty. You can literally hear the emotion painted right onto the word.
And finally, the level tone. If you flatten your vocal delivery entirely to an unvarying note, you demonstrate extreme, rigid boredom. Using a level tone on a single-syllable utterance conveys a feeling of saying something completely routine, deeply uninteresting, or entirely tedious. Imagine you're filling out an endless insurance form, and the agent is asking you a massive checklist of routine questions. Have you ever been in prison? You would likely respond with a perfectly flat, robotic, completely uninvested no. The total lack of pitch movement signals your total lack of interest or engagement in the process.
Let's move to section 6 and see how this builds. Tones on other words.
We've obviously spent a lot of time on yes and no here, but these exact tonal rules apply to polysyllabic words all across the English language too. The crucial rule to remember is that the tone always heavily impacts the most strongly stressed syllable in the word. Listen to how the pitch anchors to that stress. For a fall, 80. Stop. For a rise suggesting a question, tonight? Sure. For a fall rise suggesting uncertainty, nearly. Some. And for a rise-fall sounding impressed or surprised, immense. Oh. The pitch contour attaches right to the stress, giving the whole word its emotional and functional shape.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today, transitioning from the raw physics of frequency right down to the complex social maneuvering of a simple yes. Intonation is truly the invisible music that gives our words their true meaning. So I leave you with this highly provocative thought. Knowing all of this, knowing the immense power of the fall, the rise, and the swoop, how exactly will you say yes or no in your very next conversation? Pay close attention to your pitch, because the people listening to you definitely are. Thanks for watching this explainer, and keep learning.